The dust swirled thick in the August heat of 1882. As Adelaide Evans stood on the auction platform in White Oaks, New Mexico, her sister's trembling hand clutched tight in her own, both of them displayed like livestock before a crowd of leering men who saw nothing but property in their desperate eyes. Adelaide was 22 years old, her sister Annabel barely 19, and the world had stripped them of everything except each other. Their father had died 6 months ago in a mining accident, leaving behind crushing debts to a man named Silas Crenshaw who had no mercy in his soul. When they could not pay, Crenshaw had invoked an obscure territorial law that allowed him to recoup his losses through indentured servitude. The papers were legal, stamped by a corrupt magistrate, and now they stood in the blazing sun while men shouted bids like they were buying cattle. Adelaide held her chin high even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She wore a faded blue dress that had once belonged to their mother, and Annabel wore green calico that was too large for her thin frame. They had not eaten properly in days. The auctioneer, a balding man with tobacco-stained teeth, was calling out numbers that made Adelaide's stomach turn. "500 for the pair," someone shouted from the back. "600, another voice called. Adelaide squeezed Annabel's hand tighter. Her sister's face had gone pale, her freckles standing out stark against her skin. Adelaide whispered without moving her lips, "Stay close to me, no matter what happens. 700. This voice was different, deeper, and it cut through the crowd like a knife through butter. Adelaide's eyes found the speaker, a tall man in his mid-20s with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a black hat pulled low over dark brown hair. A cattleman, she guessed, or a ranch hand with money saved up. His jaw was set firm, his expression unreadable. 750, Crenshaw himself called out, a cruel smile on his face. He wanted them for his own purposes, and those purposes made Adelaide's skin crawl. The cowboy's eyes never left the platform. $1,000. The crowd went silent. That was more money than most men in White Oaks saw in 2 years. The auctioneer looked stunned, his gavel hovering in midair. Crenshaw's face had gone red. 1,100. 1,500, the cowboy said calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. His hand rested on his belt, near but not touching the revolver holstered at his hip. It was not a threat exactly, but it was a statement. Crenshaw opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the cowboy, at the set of his shoulders and the steadiness of his gaze, and whatever he saw there made him step back. The auctioneer brought down his gavel with a sharp crack that echoed across the square. Sold to Fletcher Hayes for $1,500. Adelaide felt Annabel sag against her. She held her sister upright as Fletcher Hayes walked toward the platform, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Up close, she could see the weathered lines around his eyes, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the way his hands were calloused and strong. He was not handsome in any conventional sense, but there was something solid about him, something that made her think of oak trees that bent in storms but never broke. He paid the auctioneer in cash, counting out the bills with steady fingers. Then he held up 2 pieces of paper, the contracts that bound Adelaide and Annabel to 7 years of servitude. He looked at those papers for a long moment, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words he would not say. Then Fletcher Hayes pulled a match from his pocket, struck it against his belt buckle, and set the papers on fire. Adelaide gasped. Annabel made a small sound of shock. The crowd erupted in murmurs and shouts, but Fletcher just held the burning papers until they were nothing but ash that drifted away on the hot wind. He dropped the last corner before it could burn his fingers and looked up at Adelaide with those gray eyes. "You are free," he said simply. "Both of you." Adelaide could not speak. 7 years of her life, of Annabel's life, gone in a moment of flame. Free. The word did not seem real. "Why?" she finally managed, her voice hoarse. Fletcher's expression was hard to read. "Because nobody should be sold like property, because it is wrong." He glanced at Annabel, then back to Adelaide. "You have anywhere to go?" Adelaide wanted to lie, to say yes, to preserve some shred of dignity. But Annabel was swaying on her feet, and they had not eaten since yesterday morning, and pride would not keep them alive. She shook her head. "Then come with me," Fletcher said. "I have a ranch about 10 miles north of here. You can stay there until you figure out what you want to do next. No strings, no obligations, just a safe place to rest." Adelaide looked at her sister, at the hope dawning in Annabel's eyes, and she made a decision. They could die of pride in White Oaks, or they could take a chance on a man who had just burned $1,500 to set them free. "We will come," she said. Fletcher nodded and gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby. It was sturdy and well-maintained, pulled by 2 strong horses. He helped Annabel up first, his touch gentle and respectful, and then offered his hand to Adelaide. She took it, feeling the rough warmth of his palm against hers, and climbed into the wagon bed where blankets and supplies were stacked. They rode north in silence, the town of White Oaks falling away behind them. Adelaide watched Fletcher's back as he drove, the easy way he handled the reins, the set of his shoulders. She did not trust easily, not anymore, but something in her wanted to trust him. Wanted to believe that kindness without expectation could exist in a world that had shown her so much cruelty. The sun was beginning to lower toward the horizon when they arrived at the ranch. It was not large, but it was well kept. A small house with a covered porch, a barn that looked recently repaired, corrals with horses grazing peacefully, and in the distance, cattle dotting the scrubland. Fletcher pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, then helped both sisters from the wagon. "It is not much," he said, "but it is home." An older woman came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. She was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a bun and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Fletcher Hayes, what have you brought home now?" "Company, Martha," Fletcher said. "This is Adelaide and Annabel Evans. They need a place to stay for a while. Think you could set 2 more places for supper?" Martha looked at the sisters, taking in their dusty clothes and exhausted faces, and her expression softened. "Of course." "You poor dears, you look half-starved. Come inside and wash up. Supper will be ready in 20 minutes. Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness in the woman's voice. Annabel was already following Martha inside, drawn by the promise of food and warmth. Adelaide turned to Fletcher, who was unhitching the horses. "Why did you do it?" she asked again. "Truly." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, his hands working the leather straps. "My mother was sold to pay my father's debts when I was 10 years old," he finally said. "I never saw her again. When I heard about the auction, I knew I had money saved. Figured I could at least help 2 people escape that fate." He looked at her then, and there was old pain in his eyes, carefully controlled but never entirely gone. Nobody should lose their freedom because someone else failed them. Adelaide felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she had built to keep herself safe. "I am sorry," she whispered, "about your mother." "It was a long time ago," Fletcher said, but his voice was rough. "Go on inside and eat. We can talk more tomorrow." That night, Adelaide and Annabel shared a small bedroom off the kitchen. It had 2 narrow beds, clean sheets, and a window that looked out over the ranch. They had eaten until they were full for the first time in weeks, pot roast and potatoes and fresh bread that Martha had baked that morning. Now they lay in the darkness, listening to the sound of crickets and distant cattle. "You think we can trust him?" Annabel whispered. Adelaide thought about Fletcher's hands burning those papers, about the sorrow in his eyes when he spoke of his mother. "I think so," she said. "But we will be careful. We will watch and wait and see what kind of man he truly is." The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm. Martha was Fletcher's housekeeper and had been since his father died 3 years ago. She treated the sisters like family, teaching them how she ran the household, showing them where everything was kept. Fletcher worked from dawn until dusk, tending his cattle and horses, fixing fences, doing the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. He employed 2 ranch hands, brothers named Tom and Will Carter, who lived in a bunkhouse near the barn and were friendly but respectful. Adelaide found herself watching Fletcher more than she meant to. The way he gentled a nervous horse with soft words and patient hands. The way he always removed his hat when he came inside. The way he listened when people spoke, really listened, as if their words mattered. He did not try to tell her and Annabel what to do. He did not demand anything from them. He simply made space in his life for them to exist safely. After a week, Adelaide asked Martha if there was work she could do to earn their keep. Martha had laughed and said that extra hands were always welcome. So Adelaide learned to churn butter and mend clothes and tend the vegetable garden behind the house. Annabel, who had always been good with animals, started helping Tom and Will with the horses. 2 weeks after they arrived, Adelaide was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when Fletcher came looking for her. The sun was high and hot, and she had rolled up her sleeves and tied her hair back with a scrap of ribbon. "Adelaide," he said, and she turned to find him standing a respectful distance away, hat in his hands. "Could I talk to you for a minute?" Her heart jumped, though she could not say why. "Of course." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to make sure you know that you and Annabel are welcome to stay as long as you need. I am not going to ask you to leave. But I also wanted to say that if you want to go somewhere else to start fresh in another town, I will give you money for the journey and enough to get established. I just want you to have choices." Adelaide set down the wet shirt she had been holding. "Why are you so good to us?" "I told you why. You told me about your mother, but that does not explain why you keep being kind day after day, expecting nothing in return." Fletcher met her eyes. "Maybe I do not expect anything because kindness should not come with a price. Maybe I just think you deserve better than what the world gave you." He paused. "And maybe I like having you here." The last part was said quietly, almost reluctantly, and it made Adelaide's breath catch. She realized that she had been so focused on survival, on protecting Annabel, that she had not let herself think about the strange warmth in her chest when Fletcher smiled at something she said. The way she found excuses to be in the same room with him. The fact that she dreamed about his hands, gentle on a horse's nose, and wondered what they would feel like in her hair. "I like being here," she said, and it felt like a confession. Fletcher's expression softened. "Good," he said. Then he put his hat back on and walked away, leaving Adelaide standing in the hot sun with her heart racing. That evening after supper, Annabel pulled Adelaide aside on the porch. The younger woman had put on weight in the past 2 weeks, her face filling out, color returning to her cheeks. She looked happy, Adelaide realized, happier than she had been since their father died. "Will asked if he could take me on a picnic on Sunday," Annabel said, her eyes bright. "To the creek on the eastern edge of the property. I told him I had to ask you first." Adelaide blinked. She had noticed Will paying extra attention to Annabel. The way he always made sure to explain things carefully when he was teaching her about the horses, the way he saved the best apples for her. But a picnic felt like a courtship, and Annabel was only 19. Then again, Adelaide had been 19 when she had nearly married Daniel Cooper before he had run off to California without a word. 19 was not too young to make choices. "You want to go?" Adelaide asked. Annabel nodded, a slight blush on her cheeks. "He is kind, and he makes me laugh. And I know it is too soon to be thinking about anything serious, but I would like to get to know him better." Adelaide smiled and touched her sister's cheek. "Then you should go. Just be back before dark." Annabel hugged her tightly. "Thank you. And Adelaide, I see the way you look at Fletcher. I see the way he looks at you too. You deserve to be happy." Adelaide felt heat rise in her face. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do," Annabel said with a knowing smile, and then she was gone, leaving Adelaide alone with her thoughts. That night, Adelaide could not sleep. She kept thinking about Fletcher, about the way his voice had sounded when he said he liked having her there. She thought about his hands burning those papers, setting them free without hesitation. She thought about the scar through his eyebrow and wondered how he got it. She wanted to know everything about him, every story, every scar, every dream he kept locked in his chest. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was falling in love with him. It should have been impossible. They had known each other only 2 weeks. He had bought her at an auction, even if he had immediately set her free. But the heart did not care about logic or propriety or the proper amount of time. The heart only knew that when Fletcher Hayes smiled at her, the whole world felt warmer. The next day was Saturday, and Martha announced she was going into town to visit her sister. Tom was driving her in the wagon, and Annabel decided to go along to pick up fabric for a new dress. That left Adelaide and Fletcher alone at the ranch, with Will out on the far range checking on cattle. Adelaide spent the morning working in the garden, pulling weeds and watering the tomato plants that were just beginning to ripen. When she came inside to wash up, she found Fletcher in the main room, bent over a desk with papers spread in front of him. He looked frustrated, running a hand through his hair. "Problem?" she asked. He looked up, seeming almost relieved to see her. "Trying to make sense of these accounts. I am not bad with numbers, but I am not good with them either, and I need to figure out if I can afford to buy more breeding stock before winter." Adelaide wiped her hands on her apron. "May I look?" Fletcher gestured at the papers. "Please." Adelaide studied the columns of numbers, the records of expenses and income. Her father had been a bookkeeper before he came west to chase mining dreams, and he had taught her how to manage accounts. It took her 20 minutes to find the errors, places where Fletcher had transposed numbers or added incorrectly. "There," she said, pointing. "You actually have more than you thought, $200 more to be exact." Fletcher stared at the corrected figures. "How did you do that so fast?" "My father taught me, before he decided he could get rich mining silver." She said it without bitterness, though the bitterness was there, buried deep. Fletcher looked at her with something like wonder. "Would you be willing to help me with this regularly? I could pay you." "You have already given me so much," Adelaide protested. "And you are working to earn your keep, same as anyone else. If you are going to help with accounts, you should be paid fairly." He named a sum that made her eyes widen. It was not a fortune, but it was enough that she could start saving, could begin to imagine a future with real choices. "All right," she said. "Yes." They shook hands on it, his palm warm and calloused against hers, and Adelaide felt electricity run up her arm. Fletcher must have felt something too, because he held on for a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across her knuckles before he let go. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You are welcome." They worked together for the next hour, Fletcher explaining his system while Adelaide organized and corrected. They sat close at the desk, their shoulders occasionally brushing, and Adelaide was intensely aware of every point of contact. At one point, Fletcher reached across her for a ledger and his arm pressed against hers, warm and solid. He froze as if suddenly aware of how close they were. "Sorry," he murmured, but he did not move away immediately. "It is all right," Adelaide said, her voice barely above a whisper. Fletcher turned his head to look at her, and suddenly his face was inches from hers. She could see the gray of his eyes, darker around the edges and lighter near the center. She could see the slight stubble on his jaw, the way his lips parted slightly as he breathed. "Adelaide," he said, and her name sounded like a prayer. "Yes. I know it has only been 2 weeks. I know that is too soon, but I need you to know that I care about you, more than I probably should." Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Why should you not care?" "Because I do not want you to feel obligated. Because I bought you, even if I set you free. Because you might feel like you owe me something, and I never want you to feel that way." Adelaide reached up and touched his face, her fingers trembling against his jaw. "You did not buy me, Fletcher Hayes. You freed me, and what I feel has nothing to do with obligation." She took a shaky breath. "I care about you too, more than I thought possible in such a short time." Fletcher closed his eyes for a moment, as if her words were a physical relief. When he opened them again, they were burning with an intensity that made her shiver. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed. He kissed her softly, carefully, as if she were something precious that might break. His lips were warm and slightly chapped, and his hand came up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. Adelaide leaned into the kiss, her hand sliding from his jaw to the back of his neck, and felt him make a small sound in his throat. The kiss deepened, slow and sweet and perfect, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that since the day you arrived," Fletcher admitted, resting his forehead against hers. "I have wanted you to," Adelaide said. They sat like that for a long moment, just breathing each other in, until they heard the distant sound of the wagon returning. They pulled apart reluctantly, both of them flushed and smiling, and went about their separate tasks as if the world had not just shifted on its axis. That night, Adelaide lay in bed and touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of Fletcher's kiss. Across the room, Annabel was already asleep, exhausted from her day in town. Adelaide felt like she would never sleep again. She felt alive in a way she had not in years, every nerve ending singing with possibility. Sunday came, and Annabel went on her picnic with Will. Adelaide and Fletcher found themselves alone again, this time by the horse corrals. Fletcher was breaking a young gelding, working with patient persistence to get the animal comfortable with a saddle. Adelaide sat on the fence and watched, admiring the way he moved, the quiet confidence in every gesture. "You are good with them," she observed. "Horses make sense to me," Fletcher said, running his hand along the gelding's neck. "They are honest. If they are scared, they show it. If they trust you, they show that too. People are more complicated." "Are they?" He looked up at her, a slight smile on his face. "Maybe not all people." After he finished with the gelding, Fletcher climbed up onto the fence beside Adelaide. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the horses graze in the afternoon sun. "Tell me about your father," Fletcher said. "If you want to." Adelaide was quiet for a moment. "He was a good man who made bad decisions. He loved us, my mother and Annabel and me, but he was always chasing the next big opportunity, the next chance to strike it rich. We moved 6 times before I was 15. When my mother died of pneumonia in Colorado, I think part of him died too. That is when he decided to come to New Mexico, to the silver mines. He was so sure he would finally find his fortune." She swallowed hard. "Instead, he found a cave in that crushed him and 3 other men." Fletcher's hand found hers on the fence rail. "I am sorry. He did not mean to leave us with debt. He did not mean for Crenshaw to invoke that law. He just wanted to give us a better life. She looked at Fletcher. "Tell me about your mother." Fletcher was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "She was small and fierce, and she sang while she worked. My father loved her, but he was a gambling man. He lost everything we had in a poker game in Denver. The man he owed had connections to territorial judges. They drew up papers saying my mother would work for 7 years to pay the debt. My father tried to fight it, but the law was on their side." His jaw clenched. "They took her east to Kansas City. My father spent 3 years trying to find her, trying to buy her contract. He never did. He died still looking. How old were you when she was taken?" 10. Old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to hate myself for not being able to stop it. Adelaide squeezed his hand. "You were a child. It was not your fault. I know that now, but I carry her with me every day. Every choice I make, I think about what she would want me to do." He looked at Adelaide. "She would have wanted me to burn those papers." "I think she must have been an extraordinary woman," Adelaide said softly, "to raise such an extraordinary son." Fletcher turned to her, his eyes bright with emotion. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "You humble me, Adelaide Evans. I only speak the truth." They kissed again there on the fence, with the afternoon sun warm on their faces and the horses whickering softly nearby. This kiss was less tentative than the first, more certain, and Adelaide felt desire uncurl in her belly like a flame catching tinder. When they pulled apart, Fletcher's breathing was ragged. "I should not rush this," he said. "I should court you properly, give you time." "We have time," Adelaide assured him. "But I already know my heart, Fletcher. I am only waiting for you to catch up." He laughed, a warm sound that made her smile. "Well then, Adelaide Evans, would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you?" "I would be delighted, Fletcher Hayes." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Adelaide's life. Fletcher courted her with old-fashioned determination, bringing her wildflowers from the hills, sitting with her on the porch in the evenings to watch the sun set, riding out with her to show her the beauty of his land. He was not flowery with his words, but everything he did say came from a place of deep sincerity. He told her about his dreams to expand the ranch, to breed horses that were both strong and gentle. He told her about his father, who had been broken by grief, but who had taught Fletcher everything he knew about ranching. He told her about the years after his father died, when he had built this place up from nearly nothing, working sunrise to sunset, refusing to give up. Adelaide told him about her childhood, about the constant moving, about her mother's quiet strength. She told him about Daniel Cooper, and how his betrayal had made her wary of trusting men. She told him about the terror of standing on that auction block, certain that her life was over. "Your life was not over," Fletcher said, his arm around her shoulders as they sat on the porch. "It was just beginning. I did not know that then. But you know it now." She looked up at him. "Yes, I know it now. Annabel and Will were courting too, in their own sweet way. They went on picnics and long rides, and Will treated Annabel with a gentleness that made Adelaide's heart happy. One evening, Will asked Fletcher's permission to formally court Annabel, and Fletcher had clapped him on the shoulder and said there was no one he would rather see with Annabel than Will Carter. Martha watched all of this with satisfaction, occasionally making comments about weddings and grandchildren that made everyone blush. In September, as the heat began to break and the nights grew cooler, Fletcher took Adelaide on a ride to the highest point on his property. It was a small mesa that overlooked miles of scrubland and distant mountains. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. "This is my favorite place," Fletcher said as they dismounted. "I come here when I need to think." "It is beautiful," Adelaide said, Taking in the vast expanse of land and sky, Fletcher took her hand and led her to sit on a flat rock. They watched the sun sink lower, turning the world into fire and shadow. When the last sliver disappeared below the horizon, Fletcher turned to her. "I love you, Adelaide," he said. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you on that platform, holding your sister's hand, refusing to bow your head. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you make me laugh. I love the way you see the world, the way you never give up." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I know it has only been 2 months. I know some people will say it is too fast. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and I do not want to waste a single day not being honest about what I feel." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small sapphire. "This was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he died, told me to give it to a woman worthy of it. Adelaide Evans, will you marry me?" Adelaide felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Fletcher, I will marry you. I love you too. I love everything about you. I love your goodness and your strength and the way you see the best in people. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." Fletcher slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her as the stars began to appear overhead, and Adelaide felt like she was finally, truly home. They were married in October, in a small ceremony at the ranch. A traveling preacher came through White Oaks, and Martha arranged everything with the efficiency of a general planning a campaign. Annabel was Adelaide's maid of honor, and Tom stood up with Fletcher. Will was there, beaming, and a handful of neighbors who Fletcher had helped over the years. Adelaide wore a dress that Martha and Annabel had made, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Fletcher wore a new suit that he was clearly uncomfortable in, but he looked handsome and happy. When he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and when Adelaide said hers, she meant every word with her whole heart. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Fletcher kissed her to applause and cheers. Martha cried happy tears. Annabel hugged Adelaide so hard she could barely breathe, whispering congratulations and love into her ear. That night, after the guests had left and the house had grown quiet, Fletcher carried Adelaide over the threshold of their bedroom. He set her down gently and looked at her with so much love it made her ache. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy," he said. "You already make me happy," Adelaide replied, reaching up to untie his string tie. "Just by being you." They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies with patience and tenderness. Fletcher was gentle, always checking to make sure she was comfortable, that she was with him. Adelaide had never felt so cherished, so completely safe. When they finally lay tangled together afterward, sweaty and satisfied, Fletcher pressed his lips to her forehead. "I love you, Mrs. Hayes," he murmured. "I love you too, Mr. Hayes," she said, and fell asleep in his arms. The months that followed were full of hard work and simple joys. Adelaide managed the ranch accounts and helped Martha run the household. Fletcher worked the land with his men, building up his herd, breaking horses. They fell into routines that felt natural, waking early to watch the sunrise together, sharing meals, talking about their days. At night, they lay in bed and made plans for the future, for the children they wanted, for the life they were building together. In December, Annabel and Will announced their engagement. They would marry in the spring. Annabel was radiant with happiness, and Adelaide felt deep gratitude that her sister had found such a good man. Will was building a small house on the eastern edge of Fletcher's property, where they would live after the wedding. Christmas came, and Martha outdid herself with cooking. They had a small pine tree that Tom and Will cut from the hills, decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments that Annabel made. Fletcher gave Adelaide a beautiful leather-bound journal for recording the ranch accounts and her own thoughts. Adelaide gave him a new saddle that she had commissioned from the saddler in White Oaks, with his initials tooled into the leather. In January, Adelaide realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, and when she missed again, she told Fletcher that he was going to be a father. He had picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, and then set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Adelaide confirmed, her hands on her still flat stomach. Fletcher dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her belly as if he could hear the tiny heartbeat. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father, and I already love you more than words can say." Adelaide ran her fingers through his hair, overcome with emotion. This man who had saved her and loved her and given her a life beyond her wildest dreams was going to be the father of her child. She felt blessed beyond measure. The winter passed into spring. Annabel and Will were married in April, in another small ceremony at the ranch. Annabel was 20 now, glowing with happiness, and Will looked at her like she hung the moon. Fletcher gave Annabel away since their father could not, and Adelaide cried through the whole ceremony. In May, as Adelaide's belly began to swell noticeably, Fletcher started building a cradle. He worked on it every evening in the barn, sanding and carving with patient care. Adelaide would sit nearby, working on baby clothes, and they would talk about names and futures. "If it is a boy, I would like to name him after your father," Fletcher said one evening. "If that is all right with you." Adelaide looked up from the tiny shirt she was hemming. "James Hayes, I like that. And if it is a girl," Adelaide thought for a moment, "Rose, after my mother." Fletcher smiled. "Rose Hayes, that is beautiful." In August, exactly 1 year after Fletcher had bought and freed Adelaide and Annabel, Adelaide went into labor. It was a hot day, and she had been feeling restless all morning. When the first pain hit, she was in the garden. Martha got her inside and sent Tom riding for the doctor in White Oaks. The labor was long and hard. Fletcher stayed by Adelaide's side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. When she screamed, he did not flinch. When she cursed him for getting her pregnant, he took it with good grace. "I am sorry," he kept saying. "I am so sorry. I love you. You are so strong." Finally, as the sun was setting, the doctor said, "One more push, Mrs. Hayes." Adelaide gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed. She felt the baby slide out of her, felt the sudden absence of pressure, and then she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby crying. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, holding up a red, squalling infant. Fletcher was crying, tears streaming down his face as he watched the doctor clean and wrap their son. When the baby was placed in Adelaide's arms, Fletcher leaned over them both, his hand gentle on the infant's head. "Hello, James," Adelaide whispered. "Welcome to the world." Little James Hayes had dark hair and his father's gray eyes. He was perfect, from his tiny fingers to his tiny toes. Fletcher could not stop staring at him, wonder written across his face. Over the next weeks, Fletcher was a devoted father. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor at night when James fussed, sang lullabies in his rough voice. Adelaide watched him with their son and fell in love with him all over again. Annabel and Will came to visit often, cooing over their nephew. Annabel announced in October that she was expecting 2, and Adelaide was overjoyed at the thought of their children growing up together. The years passed in a blur of happiness. James grew into a sturdy, curious toddler with his father's steady nature and his mother's sharp mind. Annabel and Will had a daughter they named Emma, and then a son named Henry. Adelaide and Fletcher had a second child, a daughter named Rose as they had planned, and then a third, another boy they named Samuel. The ranch prospered under Fletcher's care and Adelaide's management. They added more land, more cattle. Tom married a woman from White Oaks and built a house on the property. Will became Fletcher's foreman, managing the day-to-day operations. Martha grew older but never less sharp, ruling the kitchen with an iron fist and loving the growing brood of children with her whole heart. Through it all, Adelaide and Fletcher's love only deepened. They had their arguments, as all couples do, but they always talked through them, always found their way back to each other. They still rode up to the mesa to watch the sunset sometimes, leaving the children with Martha or Annabel, and they would sit close and talk about their lives. "Do you ever think about that day?" Fletcher asked once, when they had been married 5 years. "The auction?" "Sometimes," Adelaide admitted, "but mostly I think about what came after. I think about how you set us free and how that freedom led me to you." "I would do it 1,000 times over," Fletcher said. "Every life I have lived or will live, I would find you and set you free and love you." "That is quite romantic for a cowboy," Adelaide teased. He grinned and pulled her close. "You bring it out in me, Mrs. Hayes." They watched their children grow. James became a skilled horseman, gentling colts with his father's patience. Rose was fearless and wild, climbing trees and catching frogs. Samuel was quiet and thoughtful, always reading when he could get his hands on a book. Annabel's children were equally wonderful, and the cousins were as close as siblings. When James was 10, he asked his mother about her life before the ranch. Adelaide told him the truth about the auction and how his father had saved her. James listened with wide eyes. "So father is a hero," he said. Adelaide smiled. "Yes, he is, but not just because of that one act. He is a hero because of how he lives every day with kindness and integrity and love." James thought about that. "I want to be like him when I grow up." "You already are," Adelaide said, ruffling his hair. Fletcher's hair started to gray at the temples. Adelaide found a few silver strands in her own dark hair. They laughed about getting old, but neither of them minded. Every year together was a gift, every moment precious. When Fletcher was 45 and Adelaide 43, they celebrated their 20th anniversary. Their children were grown, James courting a girl from a neighboring ranch, Rose helping run the household, Samuel talking about going to college in Santa Fe. Annabel and Will's children were thriving. Martha had passed away 2 years prior, peacefully in her sleep, and they all still missed her terribly. On the night of their anniversary, Fletcher and Adelaide rode up to the mesa one more time. They were slower now, their bodies marked by years of work and love and life, but they made it to the top and dismounted. 20 years, Fletcher said, taking her hand. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever." "Both," Adelaide said. "It feels like both." They sat on their favorite rock and watched the sun set, just as they had on the night he proposed. The sky turned gold and orange and pink, and Adelaide leaned her head on Fletcher's shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me that day. For buying those papers. For setting us free. For loving me. For giving me this life." Fletcher turned and cupped her face in his weathered hands. "Adelaide Hayes, loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You are my heart, my home, my everything. I would live that day 1,000 times, would pay any price, would do anything to find you again." They kissed as the sun disappeared. Two people who had found each other in the hardest of circumstances and built something beautiful. Behind them, the ranch spread out in the gathering darkness, full of life and love and the promise of more tomorrows. Years later, when Fletcher was on his deathbed at the age of 70, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, he reached for Adelaide's hand. She was 68 now, her dark hair completely silver, her face lined with decades of smiles and tears. "Best decision I ever made," he whispered. "Burning those papers." Adelaide squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Best thing that ever happened to me, you setting us free." "I love you," Fletcher said. "Every life, Adelaide, I will find you in every life." "I love you too," she said. "More than words can say." He closed his eyes then, a small smile on his face, and slipped away peacefully. Adelaide held his hand for a long time, feeling the warmth fade from his skin, grieving the loss but grateful for every year, every day, every moment they had shared. She lived another 8 years, watching her grandchildren grow, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the cowboy who had bought 2 women at auction and set them free, who had loved with his whole heart, who had built a life on kindness and integrity. She told them about the mesa and the sunsets, about the cradle he carved and the horses he gentled, about the way he had looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. When Adelaide died at 76, surrounded by family, her last words were, "I am coming, Fletcher. Wait for me." She was buried next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves side by side, their names carved into matching headstones. The ranch continued on through their children and grandchildren, a legacy of love built from ashes and freedom. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the sun set just right, people said they could see 2 figures on the mesa, sitting close together, watching the world turn gold. The story of Adelaide and Fletcher Hayes became legend in White Oaks, passed down through generations. The cowboy who bought 2 women at an auction and burned their papers, who chose love over profit, who proved that one act of kindness could change everything. And the woman who had the courage to trust him, who built a life from nothing, who loved with her whole heart and raised children who carried that love forward into the world. Together, they had taken a moment of darkness and turned it into a lifetime of light, proof that even in the hardest times, in the roughest places, love could not only survive but flourish, growing strong and wild and free.